And it really measures the impact, the student performance, pre-reconstruction and post-reconstruction. Now the next slide. What you may or may not be able to see, this is a chart from the executive summary. This was from a number of schools that went through renovation between 1997 and 2003. And what you see is the average English scores and the average math scores. And in all cases, what you see is an increase in student performance after the renovation. Now, to be candid, all of the results in this study don't follow that as predictably, which I think lends credibility to the study. But this study and the others, I think, create a powerfully compelling message that students' achievement is related to building condition. Next slide, please. I want to start, before we start to illustrate these trends, with a brief history of school design. Our buildings now accommodate what is commonly referred to as the factory method of education. And I want to tell you a little bit how we got there. In 1939, a gentleman by a visionary architect by the name of Larry Perkins and a couple gentlemen with last name Saarinen teamed to develop a really innovative school in Winnetka, Illinois called the Crow Island School. It was such a success as a school, it created an epidemic of copycat schools around the nation. Ultimately, the build-out of this original concept strayed a little from the very original concept and ended up in what Frank referred to as the double-loaded corridor. And that's essentially rows of classrooms on either side of a corridor. Some people call it an egg crate design, but it supports the factory model of education. And while there are a number of definitions or illustration of what that means, this is the one that's most easily remembered by me. And that is, if you were to think of instructors, teachers, as workers along an assembly line, and think of students as product moving along an assembly line. As the bell rings, students come in, sit down. Teachers lecture. Bell rings, students stand up, move to the next station, sit down. Teachers lecture. Bell rings. And so that's sort of an analogy of the factory model of education. The problem with that is that while it served us well in the past, it doesn't meet the needs of every student. And our facilities now are limited in their ability to accommodate the educational programs that meet the needs of every student. Next slide. So we're going to start with some of the elementary trends that we see out in the nation and some that are beyond. And I want to make one note. As you look at this, you're going to notice that we're showing a lot of new buildings. However, I'm also going to show you that these principles and concepts can be applied to existing facilities. We'll show you a couple examples. Because in reality, as we move forward with the St. Joseph School District, while there may be a new building, two new buildings, some new buildings constructed, it's far more likely that you're going to look at remodeling and renovating existing facilities. Next slide, please. One of the big trends is in early childhood education that we see at the elementary level. We have done a number of early childhood development labs, and there are a number of approaches, whether it's a standalone facility or integrated as part of an existing building. This is the Spruce Street Nursery. This is a marvelous example of a multifunctional classroom, as Frank has talked about. And what I mean by that is because of its configuration, its shape, and because of the interior architectural elements, we create a variety of educational zones where different types of instruction can occur simultaneously. Next slide, please. For instance, what you see on the right, individual instruction, and on the left, what you can see is an area for kinesthetic learning, tactile learning that can occur simultaneously. Next slide, please. This is a really great illustration, a great space. This architect created spaces within the space. They created this little room within the larger overall room, which creates the acoustical separation necessary for the large group instruction that you see on the right, separating effectively from the individual instruction or the kinesthetic learning on the left. Next slide, please. This is the Mountain View Elementary School. And what I want to point out here is, remember I talked about the double-loaded corridor? I'm not tall enough, and I know I don't have the laser. There is, whether or not this works, you can see the corridors. All right, we're going to rely on height. Okay, this is the corridor. Now, if it was a double-loaded corridor, there would have been classrooms on either side. This has grown beyond the double-loaded corridor. This arrangement uses 4 academic centers clustered around a common activity area. One of the things that we see people are willing to embrace as trends is providing an academic function to traditionally non-academic spaces like corridors, and that's what happens here. So what you have at the elementary level, you have these 4 academic areas, and then you have the shared resource area that, boy, is very difficult to see with the lights on. Whoops. Let's go back 2 slides if we could real quickly. Okay, and what you see here is this is the round activity area. It's a lecture space, a space for storytelling, and it's got science capabilities because of the sink and the chemical top. So students have a chance at the elementary grades to do applied science education. Next slide, please. Again, one of my favorite schools, this is the Tenderloin Community School. This is a school that goes well beyond your standard school because it integrates a number of community needs in the school facility. For instance, it includes preschool and after-school programs. It has a family resource center within the school, and then the medical, dental, and counseling center for students and the community at large. So it becomes a community resource, much more than a standalone school, and it can be the anchor of the development or the redevelopment of a community neighborhood. Next slide, please. This is the Creekside Forest Elementary School. Now remember, again, if you think about schools with double-loaded corridors with classrooms on either side, you can see this has grown well beyond that double-loaded corridor. Essentially what this does is it creates clusters of classrooms. For instance, here is the 3rd and 4th grade cluster, and they are centered around a shared collaboration space with teacher support spaces. Also, they all have an access to an exterior area. They place a lot of connection to the outside, which encourages science and environmental education. Next slide, please. One of my favorites, the Springfield Literacy Center. This project won, by the way, excuse me, many of the projects that I'm showing tonight are winners of the Council of Educational Facility Planners International Awards for Design. I believe this was a 2010 award. This is an elementary school that is the first of the high-performance schools that I'm going to show you. High-performance schools are 2 things. Number 1, they're high-performance buildings, meaning that they consume less energy, they consume less water, they have a lower carbon footprint, they have lower heat island effect, so they're a high-performance building, and they are also high-performing in the environmental areas that support the way students learn. In other words, natural daylight, ventilation, temperature, humidity control, acoustics. They pay particular attention to those things because those things have been tied to increases or decreases in student achievement. So this is a high-performance school. Let's go to the next slide, please. It also includes one of the trends that we forgot to include, using the building as a learning tool. That's a popular trend in school architecture. Here you see there is a rooftop garden, it's a green roof actually, that has students, allows students to have access to the exterior so they can engage in hands-on science instruction and environmental education. Next slide, please. This is the Benjamin Franklin Elementary School, and it's a section that quickly illustrates 2 things. One, how architects tie the building and the occupants to the exterior. You can see the views that the building occupants have illustrated on the left. And the other thing, it illustrates how architects use nature to enhance the educational environment. You heard Frank talk about light shelves. These are light shelves right here, which allow light to bounce deep within the facility, and through the incorporation of natural ventilation to create a better interior environment. Next slide, please. I mentioned how this can be incorporated, these concepts can be incorporated in existing buildings. This is an example. This was an expansion of the Cerro Gordo Elementary School. And as part of the expansion, new classrooms were created that were multifunctional. You see those on the left, allowing for a variety of instructional delivery methods. And they were clustered around a central resource area that you see on the right. Next slide, please. Middle schools, as Frank noted, middle schools have a core concept, and that is that they cluster grade levels. They create houses. There are teams, a variety of names for their arrangement, and that's sort of the common DNA of the middle school that allows for